my name's Leah. I'm a upper middle class white. No. My name's Leah Salunas. I'm a junior at, no, I'm not a junior. I'm a senior at SLU. I study psychology and I have a minor in computer science. I came into SLU undecided, but decided to study those things that seemed most relevant to me at the time, and that's what led me to psychology. And then I needed like an outlet that was more technical, so I embraced computer science, and both of those are completely different study environments and academic environments, and it's been one of like the really formative, like those decisions have been really formative for me,
cool.
like in creating my experience at SLU.
Nice. So are people surprised when they find out you're doing both psychology and computer science?
Yes. I tell them that I'm pursuing a career in writing online personality tests. But no, people usually are really excited about the minor, or the computer science minor. They tend to just focus on that part of my degree, which says a little bit something about what's considered like a more prestigious, I don't know, or maybe what's more unusual, because I'm a girl and I'm studying computer science, so to them that's like more surprising.
So who's them? Like
just anybody on campus, anybody outside of campus, just people in general. When I tell them that combination, they just think it's cool and unusual.
Yeah.
And it is.
Yeah.
Computer science, like I'm definitely like that person who stands out in my classes. I'm different from people there. I'm like a social science person. And they always ask me, what are you doing in this class? Like, why are you taking this class? And I tell them, I don't know, it's kind of fun. So.
Cool. Okay.
Yeah.
What would you say your most salient identities are that either you would give yourself or people give to you, or both?
My different identities become more salient depending on the context. And so I would say, like, on a day-to-day basis, my most salient identities are being I would say on a day-to-day context, my most salient identity is being a white female. I navigate a lot of diverse social circles, and I feel like I'm always trying to understand my place as a white person within those circles. And I feel like I'm constantly in my head asking myself, like, what I should be saying or what I should be doing, just to be aware of my whiteness, just in those really diverse circles, like at least ethnically diverse circles that I'm a part of. Then when I'm in other situations, like when I'm doing some of my activities that I do, like basketball or something, I play a lot of basketball, then all of a sudden my being a woman is the most salient identity. So I
No, you're fine.
I did not see you. Oh, it's okay.
Continue going.
Okay, bye. In other situations, like when I'm playing basketball, which is my favorite hobby, my most salient identity becomes being a woman. Half the time I walk onto a basketball court, I have to prove myself worthy of invitation to join the game. So I do that, and that's fine. I accept that the meaning that is assigned to my gender, being like, I don't know, not as competitive or not as able to play the sport. But in some ways, I kind of like the challenge of being a woman playing basketball. So that's, yeah.
So were you always so like self-aware of these things, or were there like certain experiences that kind of stand out to you that like made you really aware of them? Or?
Yeah, I didn't really know what social identities were. as most people I think don't, because they're just inherent and abstract concepts, really, until you learn about them and the definitions of those terms. But I learned a lot about them through my work in residence life. There's a ton of diversity-related workshops that we have to do to become more understanding of the significance that lies within a social identity. That way we could be more aware of having good interactions and like really better relationships with people. Because when you can recognize the different experiences that come with a social identity, then you can empathize more, and the level of relationship deepens. So I learned a lot about those things through residence life. We did a lot of workshops, but also through psychology, like my major. My own research is in cross-cultural psychology, which was about ethnic identity, like how we develop an ethnic identity and what makes us committed to that ethnic identity. So I've just totally dived headfirst into thinking about how these identities form, like why we would be attached to them and what outcomes they have on our well-being in our relationships.
So if you had to do that for like yourself, like what does that look like? If that makes any sense.
Do what for myself?
Like when you're talking about the cross-cultural identities and looking at like your own experience and like who you are, I'm sure it comes with a lot of like self-reflection.
Yeah, well, so my research is on cross-cultural ethnic identity. So cross-cultural psychology, specifically ethnic identity. And it was on Asian American ethnic identity, but it made me reflect a lot about my own ethnic identity, which has always been super salient. Like I should have mentioned this before, like my ethnic identity is like the cornerstone of my existence. I'm Lithuanian American, and I grew up almost confused, not understanding that I was actually American. I thought I was just Lithuanian, even though I grew up in America. Oh no, wait. So growing up, I was immersed in a subculture in America, in the Lithuanian community in Chicago, and I played on a Lithuanian basketball team. I went to Lithuanian school on Saturdays. I spent my summers at Lithuanian camp. My best friends were Lithuanian. Like, it defined me in many ways, and in many ways it still does. I'm always so proud to tell people about my Lithuanian heritage, and it's tied to all my other social identities. Like being Lithuanian is innately intertwined with being religious because of my Lithuanian youth group that I'm a part of, and it's innately intertwined with my my racial identity, because we're all like tall, white, blue-eyed, blonde or brunette people. So yeah, my ethnic identity, like I learned a lot about that through my research. Like I learned why I was so committed to it, because I've had so many positive influences that have been associated with my ethnic identity. Like I've gotten this really positive sense of belonging to this ethnic group that is like this extended family to me. It's a huge network of support, and obviously then I'm going to have that identity want to like influence my everyday life, because it holds so much positive meaning and like increases my self-esteem so much. So it makes sense that I would hold on to it.
Have there ever been experiences where your identities like clashed, and like what was the context of that, and how do you kind of like overcome that?
Yeah. Hi, Ben. That's a really, yeah. So
here.
I think as you're getting to know yourself, you come to understand your different identities, your social identities, the ones that are prescribed to you. You come to understand them from new perspectives. So as I start to learn more about the implications of of race in our society, like what it means, how experiences differ based on race, and what meaning people assign to their people's race. As like when I learn about that stuff more, it comes into conflict with. It causes that social identity to come into conflict with something else. So like, I was always really comfortable being like a white upper middle class woman, but all of a sudden when I realized what that really means, it's really challenging for me to accept that identity. And I almost want to just deny the fact that I have that identity at all. That way I don't have to try to make it work and make it not destructive in some way. So I don't know that it necessarily comes into conflict with another like social identity, but it comes into conflict with my values sometimes. Like, I feel like there's this abstract label that is put on me that has a lot of historical significance and present day significance, and it conflicts with what I want to be perceived as. So it causes that kind of a conflict for me. And I'm still working on like trying to figure out how to own that identity and make it work, have a positive influence on my community and my relationships.
Have you ever had experiences where you realized like you were like putting labels on someone or like going on that, and then like vice versa, like having people put labels on you that you didn't necessarily?
Yeah, I mean, I think most prejudices are linked to social identities. Specifically, I was an RA for international students my sophomore year, and instinctive, like before that, I had automatically assumed that that the Chinese students at SLU didn't want to interact with people, that they were, as a culture, like they were just more quiet. And that related then to how I understood their ethnic identity and their racial identity. But when I was their RA, like I realized that they were all totally different people. Like every single one of them, how could I put any of them in a box, of like being an antisocial person and somebody I didn't have to necessarily go out of my way to pull into the community because of their culture. Like that was so wrong of me to make that assumption, and I'm so glad I learned that, because if I like started then to just look at each individual for who they were, for their own, I don't know, quirks and desires to have relationships with me and with people on our floor, like that's when good things started happening. Like when I could just realize that I don't know anything about people. Like you don't know anything about people really based on based on like their social identity. Like there's so many layers to people, and I regret so much that I still find myself doing that. Like I will see somebody from afar, and now I've become a lot more aware of like what my instinctual perception of somebody is, and I don't want to like divulge what those are because I'm so ashamed of them sometimes. So I'm not going to.
That's totally.
But yeah, and I mean, I don't like to feel bad for myself, so I don't feel like it's right to feel bad for myself being personally subjugated to like a wrong perception of me because of a social identity, because I suffer so much less than other people do because of those identities. But actually an interesting thing is that like, so in the United States I have like all this privilege because of my social identities, but when I go to Lithuania, all of a sudden those are flipped a little bit. Like there's different meaning that are assigned to my identities, and all of a sudden like I'm seen as the American. People assume that I'm like loud and unhealthy and and just kind of arrogant, and at first that was really hurtful and annoying because like my family would be treated very differently when we were there. After a while, like I learned to just see it as a challenge to contradict their beliefs about me, but I definitely, like, that was a good empathizing experience, like to realize what it's like to really have negative things instinctively thought about you just because of like maybe the way you talk, like, because it's clear when I speak Lithuanian that I'm American Lithuanian. So yeah.
So kind of bringing it back to like the SLU campus and how like, I don't know, because it seems in a lot of the interviews that we've done, like people point to like their interactions with just like a variety of groups of people as like the thing that really helped them like gain awareness and like be pushed out of the box. But like obviously this campus is like pretty like majority white, like middle class, Like how do you think students could, I don't know, like look past like certain things, like actually be prompted to get to know people instead of like making the snap judgments or like the snap labeling, and like there's a place for labeling, but it's,
yeah, we need to label, otherwise life would be too hard. We need to have some shortcuts, but yeah, I mean, it would be good to have more opportunities for intercultural exchange, like more welcomed opportunities, not ones that you have to go out of your way specifically for that, like natural ones. And maybe one of the ways to do that is just diversify this campus a little bit more. That way it's inevitable that people from diverse backgrounds will be in your classes with you, will be in clubs with you. Because right now we're like, what, 90% white, if not more?
Yeah.
We must be like something
80.
like that. So it's inevitable that if you don't want exposure and relationships with people who are different from you, that you can, it's inevitable that you can shield yourself from diversity of belief, diversity of culture, all of that. So, I mean,
do you think like the stuff with Ferguson and all of that has like improved that on campus, since it was literally like brought onto our campus, and like with the whole like clock tower accords and all that? Or do you think, I don't know.
I think there are positive things that have come out of it. You can for example, people who would have never engaged in a conversation about race had an opportunity to do so. Like it planted a seed potentially for people, is what I like to think. Maybe made them think like, hey, what is this that they're even talking about? Maybe it's something I should look into. So that in itself is a good thing. Ignorance is comfortable, but it's a dark cave. You gotta climb out of that cave. So potentially I think Ferguson encouraged people to like recognize that they were potentially in a bit of a cave, and they had to and they could take steps to learn something new. I think that it also probably caused, like, where there was, for certain people it maybe caused just more hostility and made them feel uncomfortable, and I hope that for them it wouldn't prevent them from wanting to learn about it more, but it could have. I think for the most part, though, it hasn't had like maybe really significant, like it hasn't transformed campus, but it made people think about something that that is happening in their local community, and it's pushed the administration and clubs on campus and people to I don't know, to start new initiatives, to pursue change on your campus. You know, it's like it's always a process. So you can't be too critical of our community for like coming back into our shells, because it's human nature. It's human nature. So instead, you have to just like trust that we're still working towards it and we're not forgetting it. And if it's important to you, then be part of that process.